Let's talk about sewing with fall fabrics. Hey everybody, it's Tessa here at Love Notions, and I'm going to talk today about fabrics, fall fabrics for the new Frankie Polo and our recently re-released and updated Canyon cardigan. Both of these patterns are perfect for fall. I mean, what could be more fall than a cardigan? And a polo shirt is absolutely a fall must-have. So let's talk about these two patterns, what makes them unique and what they need as far as fabric, and especially some fall fabrics that I think will work for them beautifully. To approach this fabric-based discussion today, we're going to be approaching these two patterns, Frankie Polo and Canyon cardigan, through sort of like a Venn diagram of fall fabrics. Which fabrics work for both, which fabrics work for one or the other, and which fabrics really don't work for either of them. And hopefully this will get you on your way to making your new fall patterns with the fabrics that you already have in your stash or some that you've been looking at in the fabric shops recently. Before we get too deep into the fabric discussion, let's talk about what makes the new Frankie Polo and the Canyon cardigan. What sort of fabric do they need, and what is really the structure that both of those patterns are going to be using? So let's look at Frankie Polo first. Now, Frankie Polo was just released on Tuesday of this week. It was released on Halloween, so October 31st in 2023. So it's on release sale right now, and it really is that quintessential classic pullover. But it has a little bit of a feminine twist, as all Love Notions patterns typically do, and that is with an open neckline. So there's not that traditional like structured boxy polo style opening in the front with the button placket that's like overlapping. This one has a really elegant, feminine, open style placket with a collar surrounding it. It is simple, classic, sleek, and the design for finishing off this collar is one of my absolute favorite styles that I've ever sewn before, so I can't wait to show you what that looks like. Now, the Frankie Polo is intended to be used with stable knits, and that's because it has that placket that needs to go and be attached to the main fabric, and we need to make sure that there's some structure there for that to adhere to. Otherwise, it'll look kind of sloppy, and if it's attached to a main fabric that's really thin and super, super drapey, it's just gonna like sink down and it'll look uneven, and you get tons of puckers, and it just will not look very, very nice. And it probably won't be very sturdy. So we need a type of fabric that is both great for a top weight sort of style, but also that can have that structured neckline, collar, placket piece attached to it and not get completely stretched out of shape and misshapen. Now, Frankie Polo is also a pattern that, but while the main uses a knit fabric, a stable knit fabric, you can use wovens for the accent pieces. So for the collar, the placket, and even for the cute little notched cuff that is available on the short sleeve piece, you can use woven fabrics. Now, I would absolutely suggest lightweight woven fabrics for those pieces, but woven will work just fine. You're not going to want to use woven for the main body of the polo because you're going to need to have negative ease with this pattern. And what that means is that the pattern around the main body is going to need to stretch a little bit. Now, when it comes to finishing off the rest of the pieces of the Frankie Polo, for the long sleeve cuffs, the 3/4 length sleeve cuffs, and the band that goes around the short sleeve, you're going to want to be using knit fabrics as well. Just as a side note, we've had lots of people ask in the last couple of days if we can put buttons and buttonholes into the Frankie pattern, and I haven't seen that yet, but I bet somebody's going to tackle it, and I can't wait to show that off when they do. I could imagine that you could do kind of like an accent type of button, like just sew on buttons on one side, and that might look kind of cute, but I have yet to see anybody overlap those pieces. It's not really intended to be that way, but I'm sure that as with all pieces that are sewn, you can make it whatever you want. So before we dive into more fabric, let's also talk about the other pattern that's perfect for fall that we're going to be referencing today, and that is the Canyon cardigan. Now, the Canyon cardigan has been in the Love Notions library for a couple of years, and it is one of my personal favorite cardigan patterns. I use it all the time, and I love using it as a layering piece in the summer and really through all of the seasons. But of course, fall is the time where we typically think of cardigans a lot. And I know that you get a lot of use out of this cardigan, particularly during the fall. It has 3 different skirt views. So it has a waterfall view. It has a gathered view as well as a straight A-line view. All of these skirt views attach onto a main bodice that's the same for all of them. And it's a little bit more fitted, definitely more fitted than, say, the boyfriend cardigan, which is more of like a drop shoulder piece. And you're going to be able to attach each of the different skirt styles onto that main bodice. Another piece of Canyon cardigan that I love is the horizontal pockets that attach right at the where the skirts attach to the main body. So there's going to be a really ingeniously designed, very cool pocket piece that you can attach inside of there, between the bodice and each of the different skirts. This pattern also has several different sleeve styles. You can make it sleeveless as kind of like a topper piece for the summer. You can make it 3/4 length sleeve and long sleeve. I like to add on a little cuff on mine just because I like finishing patterns that way, because it means that I don't have to hem things. And of course, you can create that however you like on your own. When it comes to fabrics required for a Canyon cardigan, you are going to want to stick with all knit fabrics except for one possible place where you can use wovens, and that's with that interior pocket. So you could use a very lightweight woven to put that pocket in, but I would suggest using knits for all of the places inside of this pattern, including the collar, the neckline, the skirts, the main body, the sleeves. All of that's really going to need to have some negative ease, and that's why we're going to require a stretch fabric to accommodate that negative ease. And it's just going to fit and feel better in a knit fabric. Now, let's talk a little bit about what kind of fabric is going to be required for Canyon cardigan, besides being a knit and a stretch fabric. So a fabric that has a little bit of drape is going to be great for places that use the waterfall skirt of the Canyon cardigan. It'll also be great for doing the gathered version, because as you do those gathers, you're going to want to have something that is going to show those gathers. So having something that's a little bit thinner and lighter weight is going to help you create that gathered piece. And then as far as the A-line version of this cardigan, you're going to be fine using a little bit more of a structured piece, simply because it's just a little bit more straight and simple design. All right, are you ready for that fall fabric deep dive? Let's get ready to talk about the fabrics that work for the Canyon cardigan, that work for the Frankie Polo, ones that work for both, and ones that work for neither. We're going to take a look into the fabric storage spot at Love Notions, and I'm going to pull out a bunch of different fabrics and discuss which I think would be perfect for which pattern or neither. And we're going to discuss, and I'm going to show you the stretch and the drape and the recovery and all of those key factors that help us decide whether a fabric is right for a certain pattern or not. Remember that fabric is everything when it comes to sewing up a garment. The way that it feels, the way that it drapes, the weight of it, the base that it's using, the texture, the hand, all of those things contribute to making this fabric work or not work for a particular pattern. So we already discussed about what kinds of fabric is going to be working for each of those patterns, and I'm going to go through piece by piece and show you what we have currently that fits into those categories. Now, when it comes to your fabric collection, it's going to be great for you to look at what you already have and kind of do some investigating and experimenting and thinking through what's going to be right for what you want out of your pattern. And of course, there are thousands and probably millions of different cuts of fabric available to all of us. And we always need to make sure that we're taking into account the intended fabric for the pattern, as well as what we prefer, and kind of coming to a happy compromise between those two. So not every knit fabric is going to work for either of these patterns. And we just need to do sometimes a little bit of experimenting and really paying careful attention to the directions for the pattern so that we come out with a piece that not only is great to sew and that turns out technically correct, but also that feels great to us. I know that I've sewn up many pieces where the technical sewing was great, but I just didn't end up wearing it because it wasn't my preferences when it comes to the texture of it or the weight of it or what it matches with in my closet. So really, fabric is a huge part of making up a pattern, and you really only understand what works with what with experience and time. So don't be afraid to experiment and try things out and make mistakes sometimes, and you'll be able to get where you want to go eventually.
All right, let's start off our fall fabrics deep dive with a waffle knit. This fabric has a very loose weave. It is extremely light. It has low recovery, and it has a four-way stretch, but the horizontal stretch is definitely much greater than the vertical stretch. And I would recommend this fabric, especially for the Canyon cardigan. It's just going to be too loose and light to take the collar of the Frankie Polo. It's got really pretty drape, so I think it would be cool in the waterfall version of Canyon. Now let's take a look at this fabric here. This is actually a baby French terry. Now looks can be deceiving because this one actually looks a little bit more like a sweater knit when you take a first glance at it, but upon further examination, it is actually a baby French terry, and you can tell that from those little tiny loops on the back. Now, if you take a look at this fabric, it does have really nice drape. It is a lightweight fabric, but it's got medium recovery, and that's because it has four-way stretch and it's got a medium amount of horizontal stretch, but a very small amount of vertical stretch. And that's why I think it would work for both of these patterns. It's got the drape that the Canyon would need, but it also has the stretch and recovery that the Frankie Polo does well with. Now, moving on, let's look at another rib knit. This is a very thin piece of fabric, but it's the perfect kind of color and style that I want to be wearing in the fall. It's a great topper sort of piece. It's very thin, very drapey, very lightweight. It does have good recovery and it does have four-way stretch, but I think this is going to be the best fit for just the Canyon cardigan. It's going to have that drape that'll look amazing with the waterfall version. It also has a little bit more structure and recovery, so it's going to be good for taking the gathers of the gathered version and the A-line version. Now, let's also take a look at this double knit brushed waffle. This is a pretty cool fall fabric. As you can see, it's pretty thick and it's double-sided essentially, or it has a very different front side from its back side. The front side is brushed and is very soft, and the inside part is kind of shiny and smooth. I would definitely not wear this as a regular top. I would want to have something underneath this, and that's why I would recommend it for the Canyon cardigan. It is super thick textured. It does have mostly horizontal stretch. It has a very little amount of vertical stretch and very low drape. I would probably use this for either the gathered or the A-line version of Canyon cardigan. Moving on, let's take a look at this glittery sweater knit fabric. This is very festive. As you can see, it is a very kind of textured piece. It's got kind of woven in pieces of glitter inside, so it's going to be a little bit scratchy. It is definitely lightweight. Again, very, very loose weave. If you put your hand behind it, you would be able to see it pretty easily. It does have four-way stretch with very low recovery. As you can see, it frays, and it has a medium drape. I think this would be a great option for a canyon cardigan, especially with the long sleeve underneath. This sort of ribbed slub sweater knit is a lot of places right now. It does have that variegated rib design, so that means that some of them are small ribs together and then it's got a big space and then some more ribs. It's just a varied design with the ribs. It is a very lightweight piece. It has very high horizontal stretch with a lower vertical stretch. It doesn't really have great recovery, but it's really drapey, and so that's why, again, I think this would make a great canyon cardigan, especially that waterfall version or the gathered version. I think these would both of those versions would be really great with this piece of fabric. I really love this piece of fabric. This is a very, very soft textured sweater knit. It has a very, very loose and open weave to it. If you look at it right now, it has a single layer and you can very much see through it. It does have medium four-way stretch. It has really low recovery, so that means it's not really going to bounce back very well, and it is really pretty and drapey. Again, another version, another piece of fabric that would be great with a canyon cardigan, especially with that waterfall version, so you can really emphasize the drape, or with the gathered version, again, to emphasize that drape. But you're going to want to make sure that you use some clear elastic to put inside the seams to keep everything nice and tight, and it kind of give a little bit more recovery to it. Now, this is another baby French terry. This is a very, very soft, very lightweight slub baby French terry. This has four-way stretch. It has pretty good recovery, and again, you can see the back with the small loops of the baby French terry, really drapey. This, again, is another option that's ideal for the canyon cardigan. I would say all different versions of the canyon cardigan would look great with this piece of fabric. All right, let's change gears with this next one because we've had a lot to do with the canyon cardigan. So let's take a look at this beautiful cut of organic cotton rib knit. It is very soft. It has a medium weight. It's pretty substantial. It has 2x1 ribs. It has very high horizontal stretch and very little vertical stretch. And that's why I think it would be a great fit for the Frankie Polo. It's very structured. It doesn't have a lot of drape, but that means that it's going to take that collar and it's not going to get stretched out. It's going to be able to recover, and it's going to be able to take the kind of the techniques that you're going to need to use to sew the Frankie. It'll be able to hold up to that. Now, let's take a look at this sweatshirt fleece fabric. It is very soft. It is a medium to heavier weight. It has actually a higher vertical stretch, which is interesting because typically the horizontal stretch is greater. But I would say that this would be a great candidate for Frankie. I think you would get a little bit more of like that rugby style shirt with this, but it would be structured enough to be able to hold up to the collar. And I also think you could probably do the canyon cardigan with the A-line view, just a little bit more of a simple piece. I would not recommend doing the gathered or the waterfall version with this. Now let's move on to taking a look at this Cupro jersey. This is a two-tone fabric, so it means on the front side it's a little bit lighter, on the back side it's a little bit darker. You almost could use those interchangeably though. This is an incredibly drapey fabric. It does have actually a medium weight. It's pretty substantial when you hold on to it. So I think that would make it a very good candidate for either of those patterns, especially the waterfall version of Canyon. And because it's got good recovery and a lower vertical stretch, which makes it just a little bit more substantial, I think it could work with the Frankie really well as well. Next up, let's take a look at this French terry. This is a heathered oatmeal. It has 50% four-way stretch, and it has a pretty low drape. I would call this a medium weight fabric with really great recovery. This would be an excellent Frankie. Definitely gives off more of like that rugby vibe with this particular colorway. For sure, you could definitely use the A-line version of the Canyon cardigan, but I would not recommend doing the gathered or the waterfall versions. It just does not have enough drape for that. Frankie is definitely a pattern that you have to be careful on when it comes to sweater knits. This particular sweater knit is a heathered stripe. It's very soft. It has high horizontal stretch with a medium vertical stretch, very high drape. It's a very lightweight with low recovery. I would only recommend the Canyon cardigan for this, which will be perfect for it, but I wouldn't recommend the Frankie because it's just not got enough recovery. It's not heavy enough to be able to handle that collar installation. Now, here's another sweater knit that actually I think will work for both Frankie and Canyon. This is a heathered solid sweater knit. It is very soft. It has really high horizontal stretch, but it has a very low vertical stretch. The drape is medium. It's actually a medium weight fabric with really, really good recovery. And that's why I think it would work for either of these patterns with any of the options that are shown. Sometimes our first assumptions about a fabric can be wrong. Take, for example, this piece of fabric. A double brush poly seems like it would be a great fit for any of the Canyon cardigan ways, and maybe even the Frankie. But if you take a closer look at this one, while it's soft, it has four-way stretch, it has medium drape, it actually has vertical stripes. So you really want to be careful to examine which way the grain line is going on your fabric because your assumptions could be wrong. I would say that the sleeveless version, waterfall version would be a good fit for this potentially, but because of its super lightweight style, I would not recommend doing the Frankie with this unless you're being very, very, very careful and diligent with not stretching out the collar portion. Speaking of collars, let's talk about another type of fabric that works for Frankie, and that is a woven. Like I said before, you can use a woven to do the collar or the accent pieces. So I've got a plaid here, I've got a chambray here, and I've got a piece of shirting here. All of these are structured, they're lightweight, they have very low drape with no stretch, and they're all opaque. And that would mean that they're all great fits for the accent pieces on Frankie. Now, I haven't tried this one out, but I also think this could be a cool accent piece for Frankie as well for that placket and collar. This is called Pylos Lie Knit. It's sort of like a linen look, structured, textured, lightweight piece of fabric. It has medium drape with medium horizontal stretch and no vertical stretch. And I think this could make a really cool collar or placket. It actually is a knit fabric, but it looks like a woven, and I think it might behave really nicely when you combine it with the knit mane of the Frankie. Now here's a really common fabric. This is a cotton spandex jersey. You're gonna be able to see this everywhere. This is a fabric that's perfect for Frankie. It is structured, it is soft, it is light to medium weight with a lower drape. It has very high four-way stretch and excellent recovery. It's that recovery that's gonna make this a good fit for Frankie. So this actually Tammy made in a sample, and you can see it inside of the Octave course because when she was filming the Octave course, she was wearing this piece. She used a woven piece for the accents, and it's beautiful. Now let's take a look at another piece of fabric that is not going to work for any of these patterns, and that is fleece. This is definitely a fall time, winter time fabric. This piece is very soft. It has two-way stretch, but it's incredibly thick. This is not going to work for either of the Canyon cardigan or the Frankie. Maybe you could figure out a way to make it work for you. It might be your preference, but it's probably not going to work out the way you want it to. Now here's another piece of fabric that is actually not going to work for either of the patterns either. This is a really soft, thick, structured sweatshirt fleece. It has lower drape, but again, you always have to check for that vertical stretch. the vertical stretch here is actually higher than the horizontal, which the horizontal stretch has almost none. So you're gonna need to have horizontal stretch that goes around your body for both of these patterns. And so this sweatshirt fleece is just not going to cut it, unfortunately. Another fall time fabric that we see a lot is a ponte. Sometimes it's called a ponte di Roma. This is really more of a bottom or a dress weight fabric, so I'm not going to recommend it for either of these patterns. It is kind of heavy, it's not soft, it's very structured, it has almost no drape, and it has some horizontal stretch. So even though it's a knit fabric, I do not recommend it for either of these patterns because of the fact it doesn't have any drape. During the fall, we're also seeing a lot of double knit fabrics. Now this one is really cool. It is a very soft but thick piece of fabric. It has two different sides. It is pretty structured. It has no vertical stretch and a very low horizontal stretch. And so because of that, I would say that this is not going to be a good fit for this pattern. It just does not have the styling, I think, that works with these patterns, and I would recommend it for a dress instead. Now, last but not least, let's take a look at this stretch corduroy. It's beautiful. This is such a cool piece of fabric. It's very soft. It has a very fine wail, which are those little lines on a corduroy. It's pretty thick though, and it's very structured. It has almost no drape, and it has two-way stretch, but it's very low two-way stretch, and it's really stiff. So I would not recommend, even though it is stretch, I would not recommend it for either of these patterns. But hopefully, if you rewind just a little bit, you can take a closer look at lots of the fabrics that work with both Frankie and Canyon.
All right, that is the end of our fabric deep dive. I hope that it's helpful for you, and I hope that you can go into your own fabric collection and pick out pieces that are going to help you end up with a piece that you love when it comes to your Canyon cardigan or your Frankie Polo. If you have any questions, make sure that you drop them below in the comments section. You can also check out the description box for links to all of the patterns that are mentioned here. And I hope that you stay tuned in our email newsletter because we do a monthly fabric feature where we introduce you to an online fabric company that you're gonna love, as well as give you a little discount for that. So make sure you sign up for our newsletters. And as always, make sure you stay tuned for our weekly $5 feature pattern. This week, it's the Canyon cardigan, and we're celebrating its re-release. And we're also celebrating the release of the Frankie Polo. I hope you have a great time sewing and enjoy your fall fabrics and your new Frankie Polo and Canyon cardigan. Bye.